it raises the sort of question mark. Did people at the time ask enough questions? Were blind eyes turned? And now the palace and the king are having to deal with the fallout. I think, they will try and keep calm and carry on, but I should think there's a fair amount of panic going on behind palace walls at the moment, just as to how this is going to play out and affect the institution itself.
Let's have a look at what you're reading on the Times Online and on the Times app this morning with your digital subscriptions.
The top 3 most read stories are all about the arrest of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. Number 3 is about how the king is now having to deal with the worst constitutional crisis in a century, far bigger than any of his recent forebears have faced.
In second place, Times coverage of the details of yesterday's police operation and the scope of the investigation as the former prince confronts the prospect of charges or prosecution.
And the most read article, reaction from Andrew's neighbours in Sandringham. One said that 200 years ago he would have been beheaded. Others say it's not fair and he's being made a scapegoat. Many, however, are disgruntled by the world's media clogging up their roads. To read these stories and many more in full, visit thetimes.com and click subscribe.
And stay tuned, because on the line now is Roya Nikkhah, who's the Sunday Times royal editor and somebody who knows this institution better than most and seems to have access to all kinds of fascinating facts and figures every time we chat or every time I listen to you, Roya. What's your take on the last 24 hours? First of all, just sum up the sort of significance of it, what we actually witnessed in the last 24 hours.
Seismic, extraordinary. And I think events of the last 24 hours, as much as the royal family put on a very good display yesterday of carrying on with business as usual with the king and the queen and the Princess Royal all out and about. I just think that having seen Andrew arrested and now released to London investigation, I think it's going to be difficult for the royal family to continue business as usual, because all 3 of those principals I just mentioned were heckled yesterday out on manoeuvres. And it's admirable that the king opened London Fashion Week. It's notable the Princess Royal still kept her engagement in a prison. But I think you have to think that every time they now go and do something, whether that's, showing up to an event, supporting a charity, there's going to be this risk of people heckling them. It's going to be forefront of the public's mind what is happening. And that's going to make the job much more difficult going forwards.
And I think you told us last week that in your view, because of that he ought to, just point to the elephant in the room and actually give a sort of address to the nation, if you like, and, sum up or sort of tell us, not just through a written statement, but tell us what all this means and how we should feel about it and how he feels about it.
That is what I think. And even yesterday, you have all sorts of people close to the king saying, well, there are huge constitutional complexities with that. It's a police investigation. I understand all of that. But even yesterday, that written statement that the king issued, which was stark and clear and really hanging Andrew out to dry even further, we could have heard that from the king directly. I think that would have reassured the nation and gone slightly further than just, otherwise we're in a scenario where every time this story moves, he might be charged, he might not be, we get another written statement. And I just think that is going to lose its power and effectiveness quite soon, if it hasn't already.
We're already a world away from what was the guiding principle, as I understand it, for the late Queen: never explain, never complain. That's not an option now.
Well, we're seeing it's not an option, because every time something happens, the king has to explain and puts out a statement. And, I understand why they feel they don't want to let people down and business as usual and carry on as normal. But, increasingly, I think, yes, people appreciate the work they do, and people that support the monarchy think it's important they carry on doing it. But I feel like there needs to be some sort of acknowledgement of the seismic nature of what's going on here. And, gosh, if this was to go to trial, and let's be clear, Andrew has not been charged with anything. He's always denied any wrongdoing strenuously. But if this was to go, one step further, the implications that might have for the monarchy in terms of what questions they might have to answer from who will be really, really difficult. And I think what we've seen over the last few weeks and months has felt quite reactive. Yes, people close to the king will say, well, he's moved very fast, but it has been in reaction to information coming out. And I don't know, I just think things are not going to be the same again in the relationship between the royal family and the public going forwards.
We've heard some people say this morning is definitely the view of some people in general that a crisis is always an opportunity. There are also people in this world, I may be slightly guilty of that, who enjoy a crisis. It's what brings out, arguably the best in them professionally. But what is the mood in the palace? How are they sort of, reacting to all of this?
I imagine they're pretty shell-shocked. I mean, the mood music yesterday and the guidance was that neither the palace nor the king got any heads up from the police in advance that arrest was going to happen. So, the palace are learning at the same time as the public a lot of this new information that's coming out about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, his links with Epstein. And that's the problem. That's the difficulty, is it raises the sort of question mark. Did people at the time ask enough questions? Were blind eyes turned? And now the palace and the king are having to deal with the fallout. I think, they will try and keep calm and carry on, but I should think there's a fair amount of panic going on behind palace walls at the moment, just as to how this is going to play out and affect the institution itself.
And you've already hinted at that, but to what extent are they now living in fear of, what else could emerge?
Well, I think that's exactly how they'll be operating at the moment, because we are only, we talk about 3 million files have been released. We hear and understand there's a further 3 million that have not yet been released. Who's to say that they won't be released? Who's to say what else won't come out? Who knows what might come out if this is to go one step further than a police investigation? And that is, an institution that's constantly firefighting, as the monarchy has been really for the last few years, whether that's with the departure of Harry and Meghan back in 2020, reign change, the Andrew scandal. It is not what the king would have hoped for, in the early years of his reign. On top of all of that, the man is still battling cancer. He is still having treatment for cancer. So, there is a lot going on, and I think it's going to be a very difficult storm for them in the coming months.
Final one, because a lot of friends, even family, have asked me, for the police to go in at 8 a.m. on the birthday of the brother of the king and drag him off to a police station for the day and return him after dark. To what extent does there have to be the institutional, the establishment equivalent of a big nod and a big wink there? How many conversations are happening behind the scenes between Downing Street, the Met Police, the Palace, all the relevant sort of players here, just to make sure that, everybody is moving somehow in sync with each other and understanding what the basis on which their proceeding is?
Well, I think we got a really clear indication of that in terms of the links and the timings last week when we were out in Saudi Arabia with William last Monday. And there were the rumblings that Thames Valley Police were looking at this. We then had that statement from Buckingham Palace on Monday saying that, the palace and the king would support any potential police investigation. Then you had the statement from William and Catherine later on that day. They would not have made those statements if they didn't know that, a police investigation was picking up steam. So I think you're right. Of course, the golden triangle between Buckingham Palace, very well, and Downing Street is in constant contact. And I think what, hearing from Keir Starmer yesterday saying nobody is above the law, repeating what the DPP last week told the Sunday Times, he's not saying, he wouldn't be saying that unless he'd seen the statements from, the palace saying we'll support it too. So everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet, but no one quite knows where it's going to go. That's the problem.
Roya, can't wait to read your column in the Sunday Times this weekend, but hopefully hear from you before then. Roya Nikkhah.